this question is for Mr. Mitra here. So, as we know, America has always had a nativist constituency, right? And it's also always been a land of immigrants. You've already mentioned that Trump is essentially a Reaganist, right? But what are the differences here? You mentioned the industrial, like there are problems with the economy. But do you think that the policies that the right is pursuing today will bear the results that they want? I mean, manufacturing is not going to come back, and a lot of the constituencies, they are unlikely to go for the jobs that the immigrants are taking anyway.
Absolutely. So this would, again, this is the economic equilibrium we keep talking about, which is why America, if you remember, in the last year of Trump's presidency, which was COVID year, Trump and Macron had come up with a joint plan to shift manufacturing out of China. This was a very important part of it because, you know, America has been made, the sort of propensity to consume and the American lifestyle are funded by cheap Chinese imports. So they were looking very hard to break that import. Now, we need to remember, this is not a mercantilist economy like Britain that used to keep other countries poor and deindustrialized so it could saturate the market. This is a genuine capitalist economy that believes that labor should flow where it goes. The issue is, they have not been able to generate enough high talent manufacturing in that country because there is no restrictions to outsourcing your manufacturing jobs. So it was a kind of protectionism that they were all looking at going back to, which was the urgency of which was greatly exacerbated by what China was doing during COVID, which was holding back a lot of production facilities and using it as geopolitical leverage in that sense. This is number one. But to go back to what Ambassador Trigunayat said, I just want to add 4 quick points. You know, the first thing we need to remember is, and this also answers your just recent question, Deepak, you know, the right is very local. Anywhere in the world you look at it, the Indian right, the Japanese right, the Polish, the Hungarian right, the Italian right is local. The left is global. They believe one cut and paste template applies to everybody. So the problem now is because you have a left-wing institutional capture. And, you know, I'm not saying this as a conspiracy theory. It's just that the humanities has always been dominated by the left. And 90% of the language we use in the humanities is a left-wing construct. So what ends up happening is you have this very powerful global consensus in which a lot of people feel alienated. And in some localities or in some countries, the alienated actually number more than the greater common good in whose name all these policies are enacted. So take the EU, for example. It is the exact opposite of decentralization and federalization. You know, these days we talk about federalization as a great good. What is the EU? It actually reversed all the federalization. And so you have large chunks of countries, Italy, for example, Hungary, Poland, which, you know, the majority of people out there are like, sorry, we don't believe in this. This doesn't suit us anymore. And you see this as a rebellion, a reaction. This is almost like Luke Skywalker taking on the Galactic Empire kind of thing that you're seeing, whether you want it or not. The third thing is, all this resistance is delegitimized. You are called fascists, you are called Nazis, you are called God knows what not. And the delegitimization just makes it worse and worse and worse because you don't entertain any conversations about it. The fourth is precisely because of this centralization and because of a consensus which has localized majority opposition to it. There is a complete breakdown in faith in institutions. The more the consensus, the more people that are being left out, and the consequent lack of faith in institutions. That is what you're seeing happening as a social phenomenon right now.
Right. Abhijit, and very quickly, if I could ask you, what explains the rise of the right? That's a very valid point that you made, that the fact that all these right-wing leaders, right-wing parties are all, they don't have a unified ideology. They're all primarily nationalists, and nationalists stay within their boundaries. But what explains the rise of the right across, especially Europe? And there's a war in Europe, the most ferocious war since the end of the Second World War. There's the rise of the right wing there. What could possibly go wrong?
Again, it is this consensus, a non-representative consensus that's decided for them. Let me give you a simple example, which is farm subsidies. You know, the Dutch, the Poles, and the Dutch, the Poles, the Swedes wanted the UK in the EU because the UK was consistently opposing farm subsidies. And this was fantastic for all the northern countries because most of the farm subsidies were being demanded by France and other countries, right? Now, and Italy especially, people don't realize this, but almost 1/3 of Italy's GDP, close to about $200-300 billion in exports, is actually based on agricultural and farm things. Like, normal atta or maida that we sell for, like, say, 60-70 rupees a kilo out here in Delhi. An Italian will upmarket it. They'll come make a YouTube channel and say, oh, this is very special. It is pollinated by goats in the high mountains of central Italy,
Right.
etc., etc. And
Yeah.
they'll rack the price up to $1,000. Even today, you go to INA market, you'll get, San Marzano tomatoes for 500-600 rupees, and everybody knows they're not worth that amount.
Right.
So Italy and France depend on these agricultural subsidies. Sweden, Poland, Denmark, and not Denmark, sorry, the UK do not. They actually want these kind of wasteful expenditure removed. So the problem is you will have a pushback against too much subsidies by the workforces in Sweden, Poland, and Britain against those subsidies. And because those subsidies will never be enough, you will also have a pushback from the farmers in France and Italy against not enough subsidies.
Right.
So, it's trying to get everybody on board that ends up alienating a lot of people altogether at the same time.
Right. And Ambassador Trigunayat, just a quick last question from you. What explains the rise of the right wing in Europe especially? We've seen a wave of parties across all the Western European countries for various factors, some of which Abhijit just mentioned. What's your take on this? And where does this end?
Well, I think that they are here to stay. There is no doubt about it, because I don't see a great salvation for the European economy, essentially. Yep. I mean, that's what it is. And unless they reinvent themselves, and going forward as we are moving into this so-called Industrial Revolution 4.0 and
right.
artificial intelligence and all, so you will require very different kind of thing. But on the other hand, if you come to think of it, many of the countries which are advanced are looking for labor. Like Taiwan, for example, has asked for Indian labor. We have seen Russia is looking for Indian labor in Europe itself, because there are these declining populations, graying populations. So they have this kind of a dilemma. Essentially, they are non-productive. And so they will have to depend it. So going forward, I think that sooner or later they will realize that they have to depend on the external strength that comes, especially the skilled labor force.
Right. And that's a question that I asked Dr. Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. He was there at the TV9 Global Summit. Let's listen into what he had to say.
Where the Indo-US relationship will go, what is the trajectory? This book by Dennis Cook's, Estranged Democracies. For the longest time, one of the most bizarre aspects of this was the fact that India and US, the largest democracies, were on opposite sides in opposite camps. And today we are strategic partners, right? The bilateral trade is over $200 billion. Do you think that this trajectory is going to be altered by the Donald Trump presidency if it comes in because of the unpredictability it brings in, or is there a consensus in the establishment of the US?
Well, you have to understand, India is a rising power, and one day it's going to be a great power. So that's a given. And when you look at the US-India relationship, it's geopolitically aligned, it's economically aligned, it's from a technology perspective aligned, and also from people to people. We have around 5 million Indian Americans in the US, making roughly 1.5% of the population, but producing 6% of the GDP of the country. When you're looking from a geopolitics perspective, basically US-India sees China as a threat. And from that perspective, both countries are aligned. The Quad, which is taking place in partnership with Japan, Australia, India, and US, is moving in the right direction. You have I2U2 on the western side, basically, where you have Israel, UAE, India, and the United States. And now we have announced the IMAC corridor, which is India, Middle East, and Europe. So to answer your question, I think the interest shifts. And at the moment, India is a star because the interests are aligned. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it may shift. So that's why it's important that India basically on its own becomes self-sufficient. And I think that there are two principles which are driving the relationship between India and the US. One is the economic prosperity of India by US is seen is good for America. Because as the purchasing power of people go up, they're going to procure more and more US goods and services. Education, we have 270,000 Indian students contributing over $9 billion. And the second aspect of the relationship is driven by military. US believes that a military strong India is good for regional stability.
Streaming on News9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.